No, they're not ready. Hey, none of that in church, please.
Chris Davis, everybody, here he is. Is everybody ready to get started? Can you hear me okay? Is this the right volume? Welcome to our informational meeting. Tonight we're going to talk about denominational stuff. Before we do that, I'm going to say a prayer and do a little intro. So if you'll bow your head, we'll pray. Lord, I don't know about everybody here, but just coming in this building does something to me, and feeling close to you and knowing that you're here and knowing that this is a holy place. And I just thank you for that. Thank you for these people tonight coming with their hearts and minds and dedication to this church and your good word and what we're trying to do here. We thank you for all the people involved, for the information we've gathered. We just hope it comes out in a way people can understand, in a way of truth and helpfulness. And Lord, we just hope that you'll guide us in every step that we take. In Jesus' name, amen. So my name is Billy Leasing, and I used to be a finance guy. I think that's why I ended up on this committee. And we wanted to start with just a little, I guess, backstory. My testimony, I guess, is part of it. But it's kind of why are we here and what are we doing? So for me, we came to the church, my wife and I, about 22 years ago. And actually walked in this room and we were having the contemporary service over against that wall. And there were about 30 people in here using a overhead projector with the, the plastic sheets. And for us, we just had our little girl, who's 22 now, and we were looking for a place where we could put a quilt on the floor and lay her on blankets so we didn't have to put her in a nursery and go to church. Now that's not a great criteria for choosing a church. But it works, and God works in mysterious ways. And so we came here to raise our kids and be part of a community, and God does what He did. He changed our hearts, He changed our perspectives, and I went from not understanding any of this to having a relationship with God, a real one, and that was life-changing for us. So the kids got to grow up doing the programming stuff. They're 17 and 22 now, and that, of course, has been a huge blessing. Chris and I obviously have spent some time together in 15-passenger vans, sometimes working on 15-passenger vans in the Shoney's parking lot in Kentucky. Anyway, so for me, all those years of having the kids in the programs with Vanessa and Chris, and actually even Mother's Morning Out, so coming all the way through the system. And myself got involved in the praise band and the worship music stuff, and then numerous small groups, committees, and so on and so forth. So the church became a real center point for Ursula, my wife, and I, and our family, and it's just been critical. I mean, just life critical for us. And so what we've seen in this church in that time is a lot of growth. That 30-person contemporary service has gone through 4 or 5 different shapes and sizes. Some of you guys may have been here, maybe not. We went over to the old Baptist church and had it over there while we built this church. We had it in this old sanctuary. I mean, it's had 4 different locations. And of course, now 30 people is more like a couple hundred or whatever. So the growth has been really awesome. And really, I attribute that to people like you coming in here, looking for the love of Christ, looking for a way to share it, looking for a way to learn about it, looking for ways to serve. To me, this church has been outward reaching and growing all that time. Lots of people coming, some people going, but in general, it's been a real welcoming place, I think. And so I happen to be in the real estate business, so when I work with people who are moving to Dahlonega, it's awesome and easy for me to go, you going to check out any of the churches? I got a pretty good one. And believe it or not, people have, in fact, I saw some people in the back that someone else, yeah. Anyway, but it's been an easy sell for me. I don't sell things well. I'm a salesperson, but I don't sell things I don't believe in. I don't sell things I think are genuine, true, real, and all that kind of stuff. So to be able to tell people what the church has done for me and what I've seen it do in the community and kids, it's easy. It's really easy. So, anyway, this group was put together, and I think a lot of you guys at this point have either been to the town hall or some of these meetings, is that right? This group was put together in an attempt to try to get through a lot of information, a lot of stuff that's going on within the Methodist Church and the future of the Methodist Church, and it's complicated. There are lots of layers to it. We've made these smaller meetings to try to break it into some more components. If you came to the town hall, it was the drinking from the fire hose thing. We just, by the end of it, I think people were like, no more. That's enough for tonight. And as we've tried to dig deep in it as part of the committee, we've come to really appreciate how much information there is and how complicated it can be. And so that, when Steve got us together, the idea was this church needs to figure out what it's going to do, and the only way to do that is to try to get as much information as we can, look at what all the options are, and make an informed and hopefully spirit-led decision. So one of the things we've talked about in our committee is the phrase preserving the spirit. And you could take that sort of two ways. One would be obviously the Holy Spirit. And I think one thing I've heard in this church over 20 years, people talking about is the Spirit is here. And that's either in worship, or in small groups, or in support of people that need it, pastoral care, the kids. There's just been a big movement of the Spirit. And I hear that a lot, and it's just become normal to hear that in this church. I think the other way you could take it is the spirit of this congregation. And so what we've talked about as a group, as a goal, is how do we take all this good stuff that's been happening for me for 22 years, for the church 100 years, and for lots of people different amounts of time, but how do we take that and stay on course? What is the best option for this church to continue doing what we've been doing with God and with His help? And so, if you don't know what our purpose is, that's it. We're not here to make decisions for the church. We're not here to try to, manipulate anything. We're here to get as much information out to inform you guys, because potentially there could be some voting at some point. And we'll talk about options and stuff later, but we've got to make some sort of decision as a church. So, of lots of the different options we have, what's the best one that preserves the Spirit? Does that make sense? Is that everything I'm supposed to do? All right, I'm going to pass it off to Dan, because he's got some details.
Thank you, Billy. That was moving to me to hear his testimony. And what's even more moving is to think that every one of you out there can tell a similar story about how God has moved you and moved through you and worked through you. So I'm thankful for Billy and thankful for all of you. All right, so tonight the topics we're going to discuss is just the comparison of denominational choices. So what are the choices that we as a congregation have, so that we've not drilled down on that yet. So tonight is the start of that conversation. It's not the conclusion of that conversation. Tonight is more just to raise awareness, raise questions, so that you then can dig yourself and you can start discussing, praying about things, and you can discuss them among yourselves. So denominational comparisons is what we're going to do tonight. Now, one of the things that we wanted to remind you about is the connection. We talk about Methodism as connectionalism in its DNA. It's a connectional movement, and why that's important. And one of the reasons it's important is that information is shared, theology is shared, learning is shared, documents are shared. And so part of what we'll share with you tonight is stuff that thankfully we didn't have to create the wheel when people started thinking about these things. There have been many churches that have been going through this process, and there's been churches that have spent years researching and thinking about these things, and have put things together that they have just shared with us, shared with everybody. And so some of that we'll talk about tonight. So there's a couple documents that you're going to hear about tonight. And both of them are on our webpage. They've already been downloaded on our webpage. So when you go home tonight, and you don't want to hear us go home, but you can get on the webpage and look at some of these documents. The first one, which I hope, there it is. It's up there, it's a denominational comparison chart. And it is a chart that was put together by one of those other churches that's been doing this a long time. And it's several pages, and it's up on the screen, and I know it's too small for you to read, so don't try to read it, you'll go blind. But I do want to just describe it to you real quick. It really looks at, one of the things we've got to decide is, as a future, do we remain in the United Methodist Church? Would we become independent, or would we choose to align with another denomination? And so, in order to think about that, this chart was put together that compares, and on the left-hand axis there, on the left column, it has the criteria going down, and on the top, across the horizontal, it has the different denominations that we've considered, okay? And I'm gonna talk about that a little bit, but we've got the post-separation United Methodist Church, and the reason it's called that is that's what the protocol called it, the post-separation United Methodist Church. And just what will it look like? What will its theology be? The Global Methodist Church, whether we would be independent, what would that look like? The Free Methodist, the Southern Methodist, the Wesleyan Church, and the Nazarene Church. So those are seven options being considered. Now, if you were at one of our earlier, at the town hall, we talked about there are potentially 30 Methodist denominations in North America. So why would we just look at 7? Okay, well, every denomination has its uniqueness, and these 7 are the ones that are the most common to us, the most similar to us, that are most are organized like us, whose theology is the most like us, and would be the best, the closest fit to us. Okay, you know, some of them use just totally different language and totally different thought process, and it will take a while to get our heads wrapped around. But these are the ones. So when you get home, take a look at that. I'm not going to go over that in detail, but just to be aware that that's there. You'll see another document tonight that was created by our team, and it just compares the United Methodist Church currently, the Book of Discipline, the post-separation UMC, and the Global Methodist, and it gets more in detail than this one does. Okay. And there will be other folks in the group will be talking about that later tonight. But these are all on the webpage, and you can look at those. So of those are the 7 that we studied. As we go through the night, we'll talk about those more in detail, and you can ask questions at the end, and we'll bring more information up. But that's the purpose of tonight. Is just what are the options out there? What's unique about them? How did we compare them? What did we find interesting about them or important? And what were the criteria? And I think that's what Chris is going to talk about.
Sure. So I'm going to go through with you, give you a brief overview of the criteria that we have chosen to look at. Obviously, and those of you who have the material that Dan was talking about there's an immense amount of criteria to compare when you start talking about all these different denominations. So you can really spend as much time as you want on that, to be honest with you. We'd be here all night if we went through all that. But I'm going to give you just a brief overview of the criteria that we looked at, and then I'm going to go backtrack a little bit to some of the criteria that we felt like was critical criteria that we need to be looking at. And then these folks are going to drill down even further on that after I get done giving you the overview. So, criteria that was considered. First of all, theology and scripture was criteria that was considered. Trust clause, whether there is a trust clause or not. I'll circle back to that a little bit more in just a second. Female leadership and female clergy and leadership was another criteria considered. Position on practicing homosexual and transgender clergy. Clergy participation in same-sex marriage, and sanctity of life, and position on abortion. I'll go back to all of those. Let me give you another few as you see up here. Material and literature that was presented, support service, compensation, and benefits. Now, I will point out to you, and this will be, again, in more detail later, currently, all those things, the support services, compensation, benefits, are already in place with the United Methodist Church. Okay, so those are already there, and you'll see as we go through pros and cons, you'll see those things also. Other criteria was apportionments. Currently, apportionments are paid to United Methodist Church. If you've been to any of our prior meetings the past couple of weeks, you understand what those apportionments are and how those are paid. There will be lower apportionments for other denominations. Don't know exact figures right now on that, but there will be lower apportionments when we look at other denominational avenues there. Mission and outreach was another criteria that was looked at. Really a concern is what are the ramifications on changing denominations and how does that affect current missions and outreach of this church? And what those ramifications might be. So those are obviously things that need to be looked at there. Ordination of sacramental authority. Future recruitment of clergy is definitely an issue. Currently, our local clergy is appointed by the bishop with the UMC. As we look at other denominations, that may not be the case moving forward there. So that's something that needs to be considered as well. All right, I'm going to back up now and go to critical criteria that we looked at and just give you a few more comments on that right there. So when we look at theology and scripture, the key concern here is this theology influenced by culture or by biblical authority? And those are concerns as to what's going on in different denominations. What is influencing that theology? Trust clause. Those of you who were here before when we talked about the trust clause, I think that was last Tuesday, if I'm not mistaken. Currently, the UMC has a trust clause. Most of these other denominations that have been studied do not have a trust clause. What does that mean? Trust clause simply means, and Dan's a lawyer, and he put it in very elegant legal terms, simply means with a trust clause with the United Methodist Church, you do not own the property and the real estate. Whereas if there is no trust clause, then the church does own the property and the real estate. So again, we'll talk a little more deeply on that. Female clergy and leadership. Currently, you all know UMC does ordain female clergy. Position on organization of practicing homosexuals and transgender persons. This is something that is in the Book of Discipline currently, but we don't know post-separation what that might look like with that. So it's something that needs to be obviously considered there. And then clergy participation in same-sex marriage, again, currently not allowed in the Book of Discipline, but again, we don't know what that will look like there. Sanctity of life and position on abortion, likely to be pro-choice is what we think there. But again, there are comparisons and things that we'll consider as we look at this. So that's just a little overview. Bradley's going to talk a little bit more about denominations that we looked into and eliminated. And I think Susan's going to get into comparisons of all denominational when we get there.
All right, mine is short and sweet. So, in looking through some of those criteria, it's believed that you can eliminate some pretty quickly because of trust clauses, other theological beliefs, ordination of, not ordination of female clergy, and trust clauses. So, it was most folks' opinion that those could be eliminated to make the decision easier if they didn't line up with what we believed as a church. Right. Okay. So that narrows down our options. Do nothing, remain in post-separation United Methodist Church, disaffiliate and become independent, non-denominational church, or disaffiliate and join the Global Methodist Church. Seem to be the top three remaining options.
So I'm going to talk about each option in a little more detail. The first one, if we do nothing, that's a decision in itself. Or if we take a vote and decide not disaffiliate, we would stay with the United Methodist Church. And the United Methodist Church is changing, and that's why we're calling it the post-separation United Methodist Church. Because as you know, we've talked about it in these meetings before, there have been churches that have disaffiliated already, and there are many more in the process. So here are the pros of doing nothing, remaining in the UMC. The fact that it's already organized and works very well is definitely in its favor. The organization is very large, but it's already in place. We do ordain female clergy. There's no position that is not open to the females as well as the males, so that's a definite plus. And the clergy benefits and pensions are already in place, and they work very well, and so that's a definite plus as well. The cons, the theology is increasingly being influenced by culture rather than by biblical authority. And we've done a couple of sessions on that. There are documents posted on our website if you want to see more details. And those documents have live links in them where you can click and find the supporting sources for those. So that's one thing Chris mentioned that is a big concern. Second, bishops and clergy that are violating the discipline are not being held accountable. There are many discipline violations that have occurred, and charges have been dropped or not brought at all. This is truly a breaking of the covenant that we have with each other as a connectional church. If any of us break our laws and are not held accountable, then that's a breach of trust. Speaking of trust, we do have a trust clause. We've lived with it for 200 years, but that's a big deal right now because that's one of the things that is preventing us from just acting more freely than we could have before. This says it will allow same-sex marriage. It actually already is. The current United Methodist Church is allowing same-sex marriages in many states and even in North Georgia. Will ordain practicing homosexuals and transgender clergy. Not will, already are. And as many of you know, we do have a bishop in the Mountain Sky Conference who is a woman married to another woman. She was consecrated as a bishop as such, and nothing has been done about that. Nothing is going to be done about that. The post-separation United Methodist Church is likely to be pro-choice. I don't have a whole lot of details on that. It's just that we see the trends and we see actions of people, and we think it will likely to be pro-choice. Also, the bishop appoints local clergy. And why is that a con? Well, sometimes clergy and lay people alike wish they had a little more say in who's coming to their church or which church they're going to. As a minister's wife for 43 years, I can tell you this has been a source of angst in our family many times. My husband took a vow to go where he was sent, and he did it every time. Make no mistake, it was a blessing every time. I have no problems with that. But with the tension that has been going forth in the United Methodist Church, sometimes that tension is reflected in the appointments, and the clergy and the lay people are having more tension created between them for some of these appointments. When some of the other, I know how hard it is. You want to have some say in who's coming, or what type of person is coming, or what the theology is, or something like that. Right now, we do have input. If you've ever been on the SPRC committee, you know they are consulted. Pastors likewise are consulted, but the decision is always at the pleasure of the bishop. Second option, disaffiliate and become independent. Some of the advantages, well, we get to decide our own theology, and I know this church, it will be defined by Scripture, the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, and traditional Methodist beliefs. But an independent church is accountable to no one else for their theology. We would have no trust clause. Church would retain ownership of all of our property and assets. That's a big plus. no bishops, no district superintendents. That gives us complete autonomy. Church determines the clergy appointments and tenure. All right, that's the opposite of the bishop appointing. Now you have complete say over, and of course we would always be led by our administrative board or council or whatever structure the church has put in place for that. So, we would get to choose our own. No apportionments, which ours is about $84,000 this year. That would be money staying in our pockets to go towards ministry and mission as we see fit. Of course, it does go to ministry and mission as an apportionment. I don't want to mislead you there. It is well used, but we would not have to pay it out. We would keep it local or send it wherever we would choose. Also, the ability to define and enforce standards of discipline locally. Like I say, we'd be our own bosses. All of those decisions would be up to the church independently. Some of the cons, disadvantages, is that the church would become completely responsible for clergy pension and benefits. We pay the salaries now, and we contribute to the pension and the benefits, but most likely we could no longer be, if we're an independent church just all by ourselves, we might not be able to have this administered through Westpath anymore. Westpath is our current company that administers clergy pensions and benefits. They do a very good job. It's very large, and we would lose that relationship. No connectional relationship for mission or ministry, and to me that's a really big one. Our connectionalism is important. It has been important in the United Methodist Church since its very beginning. Our covenant together is our book of discipline. We send apportionments in. We band together UMCOR. I'm sure you all know what that is. The United Methodist Committee on Relief is one of the best organizations in the entire world. Always first on the scene when disaster strikes. That's part of our connectionalism. Now, if we were independent, we could send money anywhere we wanted. We could still contribute to UMCOR if we wanted to. But right now, when something happens, we know we have already contributed. We can contribute more and often do, but it's already in place for us at the moment. So that would no longer be there. And think of all of our other connectional relationships. The connectional relationships also give us our pool of pastors, our pool of clergy. Okay? They're all part of the United Methodist Church. There's a whole lot of them. There's a lot of them to choose from, and that's another thing we would lose. There'd be no protection of theology in perpetuity. Right now, all of us in here might decide this is our theology, but in 50 years, without more structure that we would have as an independent church, that could change. There's also the danger that the church could be controlled by a small number of folks. Well, that's a danger anyway, I guess, but not so much in a connectional church, because we have universal rules and regulations, things that we must follow. However, if, whoever might have more influence, they could influence the future of the church, and it might not be the same desire of the larger majority of folks. There would be no clergy accountability except to us, of course, but no board of ministry, none of the stuff that we're used to having. So I don't know how that works. I've never been in an independent church, but I have seen them, and that can be a problem sometimes. Can be a danger of the pastor being unduly influenced by a small group of parishioners. And once again, human nature, you can imagine this kind of thing can happen. And it might not be a good thing. So that's just something to think about. No vetted pool of clergy, I've already mentioned that. We have to find our own. Recruiting clergy may be difficult and could require professional outside assistance. Where would we go? I don't even know the answer to that question. Of course, people do it. There are independent churches out there that requires more investigation, but that would be a difficult thing. And finally, disaffiliate and join the Global Methodist Church. There is a handout. It is posted on the website with live links, but I also did print this one, that we will distribute to, so you can see it better. And please just take one per household if you would, because I don't believe I have one per person in this group. All right, so what is the Global Methodist Church? Well, you've heard about it. It's the new church that launched on May 1st of this year, and it is in formation. It's being formed by current traditional United Methodists, people who are in the United Methodist Church or have been, and have decided it's time to break that tie. It's a logical landing spot for traditional United Methodists. The theology is grounded in Scripture and the Apostles' Creed and traditional Methodist beliefs. They have posted their transitional book of doctrines and discipline. I have it printed here in its entirety. I promise you I've read every word. And I have compared it to our current discipline, and there are very few differences. Completely comfortable with the doctrines put forth in this transitional book. They're very, very traditional Methodist. You're welcome to look at it. You're welcome to read it for yourself. There's a link to it on this document, and it's a live link if you pull this up from the website. There is no trust clause, so that's one big difference, and I think it's a positive difference. The Global Methodist Church allows any church that affiliates with them to keep their property. The apportionments would be lower than currently. In fact, for the first year or two, they're not even going to give a church an amount they have to pay, because they realize so many churches are going through this transitional time and having to pay a lot of money to disaffiliate. And so their finances may not be able to handle, here's your bill, you've got to pay us so much money. And so they're being very flexible with that at first. But even after that, their apportionments would be much lower. I think, Dan, you might help me with this, it's 1.5% of, anyway.
Of the annual conference level,
Mm-hmm.
and that's capped.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
a cap of 5 for the global level is 1.5% for the annual conference level.
Okay,
So
so
that's a cap
6%, 7%.
of your budget.
Of your budget, the money we spend on ourselves, that's right, of our budget. So the apportionments would definitely be lower than they are now. Here's a key difference. In the Global Methodist Church, the bishops serve terms. In the United Methodist Church, where we currently are, they have lifetime tenure. And that has been a problem for us. Our bishops, only bishops can call other bishops to account. And that hasn't been happening lately. And we have no way to do that. So things are getting a little bit out of hand. And also in the Global Methodist Church, laity have more say in bringing charges against people who are bishops, clergy who violate the covenant than we do currently. They will ordain female clergy at all levels, no difference there. Clergy appointment tenure is open-ended, and lay leaders have a greater voice in the appointments. Bishops are still involved, but to a lesser degree. It's not like you go here, you go there. And it's not right now, our clergy are appointed on a yearly basis, year to year. Church would have more say in how long a pastor stays and a greater voice in who comes. So that's a little bit more freedom than we have right now. They will not ordain practicing homosexual or transgender bishops or clergy, nor will they perform same-sex marriage ceremonies, either as clergy or in their churches. So that is our current policy, but that will be changing. They affirm the sanctity of life, and they will not support abortion. All of it is in here. The disadvantages or the cons of the Global Methodist Church, well, this is not final. This is called transitional. They haven't had their convening conference yet. Is that still set for this fall?
For the next year.
Of next year, okay. So it's a while. It's a brand-new organization. They're certain to have certain changes and struggles early on because they are new. Even though they're patterning themselves after United Methodist Church, it's a new organization. And the number of clergy available to serve churches is not yet known. We don't even know how many churches will be in the Global Methodist Church. So the growing pains are there. But my two assistants pass these down. Thank you. And if you would, one per household, so, okay, thank you. All right, so, vote.
Okay, I'm, Mo, Chairman of the Board, or Martin. My mother said she didn't name me Mo. So what are the next steps? Lots of decisions to make. Prayerfully consider this. Yeah, I think prayer is very important, for us, during this process. It's a long process, longer than I was anticipating, maybe longer than some of you all were anticipating. But it's a time to be in prayer. When you have that, the morning prayer time, morning Bible study, your quiet time with God, this is something that should be of the utmost in our minds. To prayerfully consider this and preserve the Spirit and get the Holy Spirit's leading. And watch the Global Methodist Church. Go to their website, see what's going on. Lots of good articles that are written regularly. That has lots of good information about what's going on all over the Global Methodist Church. So keep track of that and make a timely decision about this affiliation. Sooner or later, we will come to a vote. So pray about how that vote's going to go. Talk to your family, your kiddos, your friends, your neighbors, and pray about this.
Thank you. I do have also, more information about the Global Methodist Church if you want. These are just brochures that they have publicized because it is a new thing. Now, there is one point I would like to make, in that, in all these pros and cons, it may be that you are feeling like you're very traditional in your beliefs with the United Methodist Church, but you may think that same-sex marriage is all right and that it should be performed. And so you think, where do I go if those are my beliefs? I'm traditional, but I do think that's okay. And in our research, we've not found a church that has those two doctrines side by side. So that's a lot to think about. But that was a question that was raised, what if, but, and if you, it depends on how important that one issue is to you, I guess, to make your decision, or is the theology based in Scripture and the covenantal relationship we have with one another, does that override what you think it should happen in the same-sex marriages? There's not a church that has both of those that we have found. So, I want to open it up to questions, and anything you have.
While we're waiting, let me say something real quick. I wanted to
Kind of put in perspective, if you were like me, you had heard of the Wesleyan Church probably, because there's some. You may have heard of the Free Methodists, because that's a neat name, right? Okay. I had heard of the Nazarenes because of a theologian from Emory had come and spoke to a church that I had one time, that I was in. But I'd never heard of the Southern Methodists before. So I want to let y'all know, Free Methodists is only about 77,000 Free Methodists in all of North America. Okay, there's 900,000 of them in 3 African countries. So that's mainly Free Methodists are more in Africa than they are in the United States. The Wesleyan Church only has 140,000 members in the United States. And there are 1 million worldwide. The Southern Methodists only have 32,000 members in the United States, and half of them are in the state of South Carolina, okay? The Nazarene Church has 625,000 in the United States. Just to put that in perspective, there's over 430,000 United Methodists in North Georgia alone, okay? So that's getting to be about the size of a little larger than our annual conference, okay? But still, that's the largest one among the ones we consider, okay? They got 2.5 million worldwide, but it's just it's just different than what you're seeing, okay? You're not gonna ride down the street and see 5 of these churches going down the road, okay? All right. One other point I wanted to make that Susan brought up, that I had never put 2 and 2 together until I saw this document, one of the documents we got. We talk about all the time, why do we have this impasse? Why is the covenant being broken and we can't seem to fix it? You know, why is there no accountability? And I had never understood it till I saw this. In the current United Methodist Church Book of Discipline, which there's no reason this would change, the Committee on Investigation is when a charge is made against a bishop, there's a Committee on Investigation. And that is made up of 9 people, 7 clergy and 2 lay observers. And the 2 lay observers don't have a vote, okay? And so the 5 clergy, it takes 5 clergy votes in order for the process to continue. That's the preliminary stage, right? And how are those clergy people chosen? At the jurisdictional level. So the people that oversee the bishops are chosen at the jurisdictional level, and they're clergy that make that decision. Well, who appoints those clergy? The bishops, right? But in the Global Methodist Church, it's 5 clergy and 4 lay. Okay, so you got 1 more clergy. But they all vote, and you just have to have 6 votes of the 9. You have to have 6 of the 9 to make it go forward. Okay, and the committee is appointed right now. The committee is appointed by the transitional leadership team. But once there's like an annual conference organization, it's going to be, those people will be globally appointed because the bishops will be elected globally and disciplined globally. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. The clergy deployment thing also that's different is there's no guaranteed appointment. Susan had talked about a year-to-year appointment in the United Methodist Church, but there's a guaranteed appointment in the United Methodist Church. And you would think as a spouse of the clergy, I'd be all for that. But actually, I'm not, okay? You don't want guaranteed appointment because you want your clergy to be competent people like we have, right? All people don't have good, competent pastors, okay? And they get appointed even if they're not, okay? So that's another thing to think about. I just want to see if there's anything else. I think that's it. I just wanted to, those are just some things that came out to me that we didn't have the chance to talk about. Okay, questions? Yes, sir.
Dan, a mortgage that has a cap, if it's a 6% cap, I just think I have a 6% mortgage. I don't care what it starts out with. When I did the math on what our apportionment is here against our budget, I come up with 6.5%. You're saying that we've been told that that's the cap. So I don't see where the point that our apportionment is less.
Well, if it's.
I know it starts out at nothing, but I'm saying, can we somehow clarify with them when they're going to get to that point, just like you would with a mortgage that has a cap?
Well, I don't think there's any way to do that until you know how many churches there are, how many churches there are, how many in an annual conference, and the whole global thing. You have to know, because they have to determine what the budget is, right? And so that's I guess like we talk about flying the plane while we're building it. I think that's the problem. So there's no way to answer that question right now. I don't think so.
So we really can't say that the apportionment is going to be less.
Well, historically you could say that, because of the reason that the people, the bean counters that know that, the people that do all this research, they say that because they've had the history of looking at the numbers, and they're saying now that we're at about 10%, and so if you're at 6%, that's less than 10%, and so that's the way I understand it. That those folks have said that if you cap it at lower than what you're paying now, it would have to be lower.
Well, I'm just simply saying, I'm a math person, our budget's 1.3 million, if I remember correctly, and we're doing about 84,000, I've done the math, that's 6.5%, any way you look at it. So I've done that several times, that's our current apportionment, is about 6.5%, not 10%.
Well, and the thing about that is, we don't know what the budget's gonna be.
If the church disaffiliates, how soon do they have to make a decision on whether they go to an independent or a global or something else? Is there a time frame, or is that just an open time period?
It's open. Okay, the vote to disaffiliate, it stands alone. Once you do that, if you decide to disaffiliate, you're suspended until you do something else. Until you do
Gotcha.
something.
Okay. So you have time to consider things.
Yes. Other questions?
Based kinda on that, at current, the way things are proceeding, the timeline, when do you foresee the vote to be, which would trigger then the second vote on which way you choose after that? Cause I've heard once you vote, then the vote has to be approved upstairs.
That's correct. The vote,
That's another meeting, I know, but when do y'all foresee the vote?
the votes will be held with churches who have the request to do so, everything in line, next March and April, is that correct? And then annual conference would have to approve any disaffiliation in June of next year.
So the ball can't even start rolling till after June of next year.
No disaffiliation can occur until after the first week of June next year. That's when it would be official. There was a question?
I think he was saying, if I understood right, we could vote before then and put the paperwork in and that would be the vote as long as we got the DES and the bishop here during that vote, is that correct?
No, we cannot vote before then. All that we can do on the local level, correct me if I'm wrong, is our administrative board can recommend that we vote. The administrative board votes to have a vote. But we can't call the vote ourselves. The district superintendent sets the date and the time for the vote. And they have told us in this conference that they will not do that until March 1 of next year. They'll schedule the votes. So we can't do it. Is that correct?
And with reference to the voting, and there's a lot more people in this meeting tonight than there have been before. And it has been brought up before that when we do have the vote, it is only members of this church who are present that can vote. There's no absentee ballots, there's no early voting. No mail-in votes. Your vote only counts if you are a member of the church and you are present when the vote is taken.
That is correct. Did everyone hear what he said? Yes, back. Gene?
Yes, Dan, if we vote to disaffiliate and then vote to join the Global Methodist Church, in 2 or 3 years from now, they start going off, how difficult will it be to disaffiliate from them?
So, Gene, there's two parts to that question. First, how do you didn't ask this, but I wanna say it anyway. How do you join the Global Methodist Church? What is the process? How long does that take? Apparently, the way, if you go on the website and look at the forms you have to fill out, a church body has to meet. Everybody that's a member votes, and it's a simple majority. And it's a simple majority votes to join the Global Methodist Church, and everybody agrees to abide by the doctrine of the Global Methodist Church. That's it. That's all you have to do to join, okay? And since there's no trust clause, what they have said is, and it's in their book of discipline, that to leave, you have to have a 90-day discernment period, prayer period, before you vote to leave, to disaffiliate. And then if you just vote by a simple majority to leave, you leave. And there's no trust clause, so there's no payment. And so that, it's easy in, easy out.
So. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
If we vote to disability, would Steve and Robin automatically come with us? Would they have, we have to vote to call them, would we have to resign their current?
Yeah, they would, that, our vote does not bind them, they have to make their own independent choice, separate from the church. And then if their choice did not align with our choice, then they would, let's say if our church voted to disaffiliate and they elected not to, then they would remain and be appointed to another church. If they elected to, themselves, disaffiliate, so to speak, then they would, then the choice would be, well, do they stay here or not? Okay, but they would, so it's their independent choice. We're not bound by them and they're not bound by us. Okay, yes, sir.
So in terms of the pastor, if the pastor decides to disaffiliate and stay with the church, there's a loss of pension, correct?
No, because it transfers, West Path has already said that if there's more than 100 churches, they just transfer, and there's already 400.
Okay.
And so it would just transfer directly, so there's no loss of anything. And some things are actually better, but some things get cashed out and put in a 401k type thing rather than some things. They're different depending on how old the plan
I was
is.
just thinking that the apportionments then could also be used then to protect that pension for the pastors.
Well, yeah, but we would always
That's
have
even
that,
better, though.
we'd always have that obligation though to continue to trip. But yes, sir.
So, this really good analysis that has been handed out compares a reaffiliation to the Global Methodist Church only. I understood from an earlier session here that that's not the only option we would have. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's why the other one, that's on the webpage, it was just too much to print out. It's got 7 churches as compared to it's on the webpage.
Good, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Dan, if Robin and Steve decide to go with us, disaffiliate, they have to give up, I'm not sure what it's called, their credentials as a United Methodist minister?
It would either have to be transferred to the Global Methodist Church or, yes.
So would they transfer them?
That, yeah, it's not a question that they would not permit it. It has to be done.
I thought at Mount Bethel, he lost his.
Well, he did because his church did not go to a Global Methodist Church, that his credentials could be transferred. And at the time they went through that, the Global Methodist Church didn't exist. So he had no choice.
It's just surrender.
Yeah, right.
Kind of a protocol.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am?
What exactly does global mean? Does that mean the entire world? It does?
Yes.
Okay, and so if this is brand new, so it's brand new all over the world, when you just said there's 400 churches, does that mean throughout the entire world, or does that mean just here in the United States, or?
Yeah, that's in the United States right now, but
How many are there in other?
I don't think they know that number, they may know it, but it's not being released. They're keeping those numbers kind of close to the vest.
Romania and
Yeah,
Hungary.
we know that the entire Romanian, Hungarian annual conference is gone.
I
There's
can't
some eruption.
imagine that the African United Methodist Churches are gonna stay with you.
Yeah, there's a lot of back and forth about that because they really, the cross and flame mean a lot to them, that symbol and the church and the tradition of the church. There's just a lot, that's an unknown, it really is. So, was your question answered, okay. Yes, ma'am. No? Okay. Anybody else?
If we stay, what's the likelihood of the bishop doing to Robin and Steve what you did, Jody?
Somebody else is gonna talk.
We don't know.
I didn't think anyone got
Dan,
I think the reality is that was a really out of the box special circumstance. That's not that's not how they operate, so.
might have misunderstood, did someone say the Romania, is gone, the Methodist Church is gone? What about the missionaries, because we have friends over there that are missionaries.
You're not gone, just the Bulgarian and Romanian annual conference, they're together in one annual conference. They voted in mass to disaffiliate.
So they still exist under another name, or?
Well, they voted to join the global Methodist.
Oh, okay, good, okay.
Where are their headquarters?
Well, that's, right now, they've got the chief operating officer in Virginia, and so they don't have a headquarters yet, because you don't build something until you need it, right? You know? So that's yeah.
But it's very well organized. I encourage you to go to their website and read about them, investigate them.
But so my understanding of the Global Methodist was that it was the United Methodist theology that was just transferring to that name because the United Methodist is now transitioning to something that is not as acceptable.
Correct.
And where did it originate? Did it originate here, or, because I was under the impression that it was started in Africa.
No, we John Wesley, in England.
Well, I know that, but I mean, I thought that Africans were the ones that were trying to make it global.
Oh, no, it's all, the United Methodist Church has been a global denomination always.
Okay.
But you
Oh,
wanna
wait,
know.
are you asking with the GMC? Are you asking where the GMC originated? Okay, well, that's a name, Global Methodist Church, just like United Methodist Church.
Okay, well, has it always been in existence?
No, it started May the 1st. Okay, it's been in, transit, been in, formation, people, organizing and developing task forces and theologies, and a lot of work's gone into it over the last 2 years, but the switch was flipped, the incorporation was done May 1st.
So in our country, or?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
All right, thank you.
Dan, maybe we're late, so maybe you talked about this already, but Keith Boyette, the head of the Global Methodist Church, is gonna be all over North Georgia in August.
But not in July.
Yeah, what he was saying was that in August of this year, for 2 weekends, Keith Boyette, who is the chief organizing officer of the Global Methodist Church, is coming to North Georgia. And he's gonna be on the 12th, 13th, and 14th, is gonna be in the western part of our annual conference. And then on the 2 weekends later, the 26th and 27th, I think it is, 26th and 27th, Saturday and Sunday, will be in the eastern part. And so we'll get out information about that, if somebody wants to come and hear him about and hear directly from the source in the next month. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
If we disaffiliate, you said that it would be a two-part vote to disaffiliate and then decide which direction we're going in. Is there any recommendation as to how long we should wait between those two things? Because it seems like it would be more prudent for us to make a decision, maybe prudent financially and every other way, quicker, sooner rather than later.
Anybody want to tackle that? All right, well, I think that you raise a very good point. It's individual, there's no set guideline. The Global Methodist Church says you come whenever you're ready. And they don't say that you've got to wait a certain amount of time, or that you've got to do it within a certain amount of time. So that's up to our individual congregation when we feel led that we're ready to make a decision. So there's arguments for both. Some people would say we need to wait and see, what does it look like? How does it form? What do they really believe in there once they convene? Other people would say, well, if you go ahead and join, you get to send delegates to that convening conference, and you have a say in what it means. So it's just the discernment of the body. That's a good question. Yes, ma'am.
I actually want to piggyback off of that, because on here it says the 2016 discipline, but has there been, or do we know when there's going to be a revised one?
Of the UMC?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the UMC will, every 4 years has a general conference. The one that schedules is in 2024.
Okay.
If COVID doesn't put it off. And then there'll be, every 4 years after that. So there will be, the potential for a change in 24, and then every 4 years.
So that means that, but we could vote before the new,
Yes. Correct. And in fact, if we're using 2553, which is the only exit avenue now, we have to vote before then, because it expires before 2024. Yes, sir.
When you get to 2023, we hold the vote, but only 60% vote to disaffiliate. Does that mean that this asset of the church and the members remain United Methodists?
Yes.
So, Thursday night, we have a meeting on voting process, but to answer your question, if the congregation, if the administrative board votes for the congregation to vote on this, it has to be a 2/3 majority vote in order to disaffiliate. To piggyback on what you said, and that is 2/3 majority of members present. With that right there. If it's not greater than a 2/3 majority, so. Correct, yeah, then the disaffiliation process is over, is what I meant, if it's not a 2/3 majority. Yeah.
You might want some of the youth involved in that too. The youth are involved in this.
Yeah, every member of the church, every member of the church has a vote, regardless of.
If they are present.
If they are present, absolutely, correct.
This is just a curiosity question. Are other local churches in the area, here in Dahlonega and the big St. Paul's and the one down in Dawsonville at Bethel, any word on their situation and what they're doing?
We have had churches within the area present for these meetings.
What's the statement?
That means they're looking for information.
Because the little church out by my house, a little St. Paul's, they don't even hardly, they have a pastor just recently, it's not a, circuit pastor. So I'm just curious for their sake, being small and little congregations, how they're.
I think several other smaller churches have already disaffiliated. 71 total. When you look at the timing of this, we're very much ahead of the timing. When you look at when we may have to vote and when things happen, so we're way ahead of the timing. And I think when we started out to do this, we wanted to be very diligent, and that's why we're way ahead of the time, is we want to be very diligent, and we want to present as much material to the congregation and everyone as we possibly can. I know you had a question, sir.
Yes, thank you. I'm sure this will be addressed more in depth at the next meeting, which is the voting process. But I keep hearing that we have a voting cannot start until March 1 and must be completed by.
No, when our church
No,
votes,
the entire state, or
the entire conference,
the entire
we'll
conference.
vote March and April.
March and April. Is there a systematic approach so that there will be, everybody's voting on a different day through there, or is it just gonna be one big vote on one day
No.
and we even know?
The district superintendent, our district superintendent will schedule our vote. So each district will be autonomous in that regard. The whole conference votes during March and April, but it's up to the district superintendents to schedule the individual votes. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
And he has to be president, whoever it is.
Yes. Other questions? I've got some good questions. Yes, sir.
One other option that I heard early on, and I can't see it being a big option, we could just walk away from the UMC, couldn't we?
Leave the keys on the counter.
building, we as a group of people would walk out the door. I mean, that would be an option. So if less than 2/3 voted, the option if people were unhappy would be to walk out and start another church somewhere else. Would the global church take that group?
They're gonna plant churches, yeah.
Okay, so they would, new churches will be formed.
I know we're a little bit past time, and we're cognizant of that. You're welcome to stay, we'll talk to you as long as you want to talk, but if you need to leave, don't be shy, you can get up and walk out, that's all right. Another question? Well, I encourage you to look at the resources, there's way too much information out there for us to be able to get it to you in an hour. Come up here, these are 7 different brochures that explain different parts of the Global Methodist Church. On the website, the document that's up there now, the 7 denominations that we compared, is information about where to find out more about each of those denominations as well as this 4-page chart telling about it. Embedded in this chart, no, there are no links. I mean, they're printed in there, but they're not live links. The other chart does have live links, the small 3-column chart that I passed out. No one has live links. But do your homework. We want you to know. We want you to find out. We want everyone to know what's going on. We want everyone to feel comfortable with the choices that are in front of us. Talk to each other, talk to any of us, talk to Steve, talk to Robin. Yeah, we are here to help you, help ourselves as much as we can, understand what's before us, what our choices are, and where we need to go. But as Mo keeps telling us, thank you, Mo, above all, we need to pray. We need to prayerfully discern what God has in store for us. Our future is unknown, but our God is not. And we need to depend on that God.